What's going on, everybody? I'm Dan the Realtor. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into chain of title complexities, from conducting title searches to navigating title defects. We'll be sharing insights on how to protect your transaction and predicting the future needs in real estate. Stay tuned for the essential knowledge on securing your real estate investments. Welcome to the Real Estate Wire, folks. What's going on, everybody? I'm Dan the Realtor.
I'm Nick Bush, the Realtor.
And today we got a special guest. We got Joe Bruno. What's up, Joe?
Hey guys, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Doing good. So everybody in the Real Estate Wire Squad, we got a recurring fill-in host.
I'm back.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, bro.
Yeah, absolutely. As Dan said, my name's Joe Bruno. I am a manager over at Universal Title Bethesda and Universal Title Rockville. Been in the business for 4 years, licensed attorney in Maryland, DC, and California, although I don't really practice in California these days. It is tough being out here as a West Coaster, now living on the East Coast, I'll be honest with you. But it's been a great 4 years, learned a lot, and I think I have a lot of knowledge to share, especially in terms of securing a real estate transaction and talking about some of the current trends we're seeing right now, especially from the title side of things.
Dude, I love it. I know one of the, I think one of the biggest questions in most of my clients' mind, probably you too, Nick, is, like, they understand the process of, they understand the process of buying a house. Okay, I buy a house. And then, okay, they understand the process, okay, I move into my house. But, like, that middle part is kind of where they're always usually like, okay, but how does that happen? Like, how do we make the sausage? So I think bringing you here, we're going to be kind of talking about how the sausage actually gets made.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good topic, and I'll be honest, if your title company's doing their job well, it's going to be a pretty seamless process, and there is going to be some education involved, but shouldn't require too much from buyers and sellers because you have a good team who's taking care of it for you. But just to, like you mentioned, talk about that sausage making and what that looks like, I think a good starting point really is, what is title? What does a title company even do?
Yeah.
And I think the starting point there is title is really legal ownership. That is what we are looking at. And in a nutshell, our job as a title company is to look at the legal ownership of the seller and make sure we can transfer that to the buyer. That way the parties are complying with the contract that says parties should do exactly that, have clean title transferred from the seller to the buyer.
So the title is basically like the name on who owns the property. When
we are looking at titling, it is the name, but it's also the legal owner. So it's much more than just a name, but it is legal ownership. And when we look at title insurance protects legal ownership. We'll get into it, I think, maybe a little bit later, but we're having a lot of fraud in the industry now. Literally had an incident last week where I had someone pretending to be a seller, not actually be a seller. And if we had not caught the fraud, and this person who claimed to be the seller tried to sell the property to the buyer, that buyer would never have actually taken title to the property because the seller was not able to give that to the new buyer. So any transfer actually wouldn't have been a legal transfer.
Wow.
So before you get into, like, you know, the episode, explain. I have clients from New York right now. They're buying, and I know New York is an attorney state.
That's correct.
But we're a title attorney state, I guess, right? Explain the difference between, like, what you do and, like, what being in an attorney state means.
Yeah. So the difference is here from the DMV, and I'm going to be talking mostly about DC, Virginia, and Maryland because they generally follow these same rules, as opposed to, like you mentioned, New York, which is an attorney state. In an attorney state, you have attorneys who are going to be representing the buyers, the sellers, sometimes the county, different entities. So everyone has an attorney representing them in a transaction. But here in the DMV, you don't need an attorney representing all sides of a transaction. And to be frank, you actually don't even need an attorney to represent a transaction, except for the very small part of drafting a deed. And I can talk about more later if I need to. But really, I work at a title company. So we are not lawyers who are representing buyers or sellers. We're more so representing the contract. Some people like to say we are following the terms of the contract that is agreed to by the sellers and the buyers and make sure we're following those terms. But I don't represent any of the parties because I can't fairly represent parties if I'm going to be answering legal questions to the buyer that are going to be detrimental to the seller, or vice versa. So we are very much like a neutral, independent third party here. And 90% of the time, 95% of the time, that is enough. There are situations where things get hairy. We have buyers or sellers who believe the other side is not complying with the contract. And it's at those times during a real estate transaction in the DMV that then sometimes I'm saying, hey, I'm so sorry. You're asking if the seller breached. There's a lot of facts involved. I cannot do that as a title company, as a settlement company. You're going to want to talk to an attorney outside of me who can fully and adequately represent your interest and try and make sure that seller or buyer is complying with the terms that you agreed to.
Yeah. That's so like, all right, so people in the cheap seats. Let's say, for example, remember when you were at school and you used to have a book bag, and you used to take all the book bags and you put them in the book bag room, and all the other kids had book bags too. Title is basically like when your mom used to write your name on the book bag so that you know which book bag is your book bag. All right. So let's.
Is it though? Like, I totally was like, I looked at Joe, like, did Joe get that? Because I did not get that.
Yeah.
What he's saying. It is.
Yeah, like your mom used to write your name on your book bag, and she'd be like, "That's Nick's book bag." So that when somebody else came in with the same exact book bag, be like, "Nah, that's mine. See, boom, I got the title right here."
That's true. But now we're in a situation where we have people taking book bags that have their names on, crossing out that nickname when they're not supposed to, and putting new names on it saying, hey, this is mine. Here you go. You can have it.
So the title goes back to my mom and says, hey, did you actually like write this? Is this your handwriting? Like, is this really the name, or did like somebody scratch it out? And then the person who scratched it out, it's title fraud.
That's exactly right. We are going back and verifying that the that mom, and in this case the land records, are accurate. Everything checks out through the legal history of the property, that this person had the authority to do it, and we're also confirming that the person who's claiming to be mom actually is mom.
Yeah, exactly. See, you was hating on my metaphor, bro.
I just was slow to get it. You know what I mean? I was just slow to get it.
It's okay.
Okay, so Joe, let me ask you a question, right? So we ratify an offer, or go under contract, right? Interchangeable words for people that are listening. We send the contract to title. What do you guys do to get the file started? Like, what's the process?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, it used to be a 30-day process, and first thing that happens once that contract is sent over to hopefully Universal Title or whoever the title company is we're reaching out to buyers and sellers. We're letting them know, hey, we're Universal Title. We will be processing your transaction for the next 21 to 60 days. And we are getting information requests filled out. We're also immediately ordering what's known as the title abstract or the title search. The title search is the legal history to that property. So we actually have abstractors who are going through the land records and looking through what's known as the chain of title to see the entire legal history of that property and make sure it checks out. So in some cases, we do have a deed going back to the 1800s. Usually you only need a 60-year search, but sometimes we had to go back further to make sure that, as far as we can tell, the legal history for that property is good. And it's not just the names of the prior owners, but it also includes any liens against the property. Every time someone takes out a mortgage to purchase a property, that gets recorded onto the legal history of the property. And every time a loan is paid off, that lender files something in the land records also saying, hey, this loan has been paid off. It's no longer active. You also see in some scenarios judgments against sellers, or if someone didn't pay HOA liens or something like that, that could also get filed against the property. And there's different rules as far as the statute of limitations, as far as how long certain judgments are good against the property or not good, or against certain people or prior owners. So it can get pretty complicated, especially Maryland, DC. Those title searches are usually a little bit more involved, 200, 300 pages, whereas Virginia, we're going 20 to 60 pages typically.
One thing so I want to ask you about what is a title defect, and then I also want to pick your brain a little bit about one of the one of the biggest problem that you've had, like an interesting story. Before I get one of the stories that I had about a chain of title issue, which is why it's important to you as a buyer or prospective seller to make sure, number one, if you're a buyer, you want to make sure that you're choosing a title company that you know is legit, right? When you're selling your house, you don't really have the choice you do have the choice of title company. you always have the choice of title company. Okay, sorry, National Association of Realtors.
Thank you.
You have the choice of title company, right? Now, typically, when you have your house on the market and you get it under contract, ratified contract with a buyer, that buyer is going to bring their title company. Most sellers, most of the time, they say, "All right, we'll just use your title company." But if you are selling your property, you do have the right to choose your own title company. It does add more people in the kitchen cooking the soup. But if you're 100% certain that, yo, I want to use my title company, those two title companies would then just communicate with each other, and then you would just do a settlement at your title company, and the buyer would do the settlement at their title company. So one interesting story I had about title, I run into a lot of this because, as you know, I do probate, I do probate real estate. I help people sell homes and purchase family properties. And one issue I run into a lot is, grandma owned the house, Big Mama, right? And Big Mama passed away a long time ago, and then Uncle John was living in the house. Well, as far as we know, it's Uncle John's house. Like, we don't know. Uncle John been living there 30, 40 years. Nothing really been said about it. He's staying there. He's fine. Well, Uncle John then, got married, right?
Yeah.
So Uncle John and Aunt Jane been living there for 30 years. Well, Aunt Jane wasn't on the title, but then they had 2 kids or 3 kids, right? So then it gets into all of these different like chain of title complexities where once finally Uncle John and Aunt Jane pass away, and then the cousins and nieces and nephews and stuff are heirs.
Yep.
Then it turns into, okay, how do we whose estate do we need to be opening, and whose name is on the title? Turns out Big Mama never transferred it correctly to Uncle John. Aunt Jane wasn't ever on the title in the first place, so she ain't got no claim. So all her heirs are out, even though they thought they were in, right? And so I run into a lot of those issues all the time. So one thing I want to ask you, the third question I want to ask you, how to avoid those types of chain of title issues. So like your biggest issue that you've seen, and then how can somebody avoid those types of chain of title issues?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that type of scenario with all these heirs running around and we don't know who actually owns the property. We did have a scenario a few weeks ago where we did need to get 12 different people to sign off on the sale of a property.
Sheesh, imagine that.
Yeah.
They got $1 each.
After the attorney fees, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think the best starting point, because we are in a market right now where we're seeing a lot of people who are selling properties, are those that are estates where the person on title is deceased or someone has passed away, and there's a question of who's able to sell the property. And I think the best starting point for this is, well, what is the most current deed that we can find in the land records that says who owns the property? That is always the best starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And where you have a scenario, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about the lawyer side of things, and every first or second year law student knows this, and it does exist in the real world, but there's these two concepts as far as how is title held. When you look at the deed, how did the owner or owners hold title? In a typical scenario that you'll see these days, especially, you have 2 people listed on the deed who own the property, but one has passed. And who will be able to sell that property next is going to depend on how they legally own that property. The simplest scenario is if the 2 title holders, let's just call them A and B. A and B were married. They both held title. B dies. We'll just say the husband dies. If property was held and is stated such on the deed as tenants by the entirety, which is only available to married couples, or as joint tenants with right of survivorship, there's some nuance there, but basically joint tenants, then once one of those parties passes away, the property will automatically go 100% to the surviving person on title, and that surviving person can sign off and sell the property. There's no need to go through probate or things like that because of how they hold title. But scenario I had come up last year is where parties thought this was what was happening. There are 2, husband and wife, held property. They thought it was held as joint tenants or tenants by the entirety, and that way when the husband passed, just the wife would be able to sell of it. But it actually was not held that way. It was called in an alternate form of tenant ownership known as tenants in common.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you guys are like, oh, I've heard of this. It was in our real estate classes. So tenants in common means typically each party owns their own separate interest in the property. Typically, it is seen as a 50-50% ownership of the home, but you can have different variations between two parties of like 99% and 1%. There's different ways to break it down, but the default is typically 50-50% ownership. And that means if property is held as tenants in common, that when the husband dies, the property does not automatically go to the surviving member. It actually now needs to go through probate and follow whatever testamentary devices are in place. And I mean a will. If there's a will, we're now going to follow the will. If there's no will, we're going to follow intestate succession. And his heirs under the laws of Maryland or DC are what we need to follow and who are going to have to sign off. So that can make things a whole lot more complicated. I did have a similar situation back, I think it was the summer of last year, where we had two parties on title. They were married, they got divorced, and there was an order where they were supposed to adjust the title to the home back in the 90s, and unfortunately the wife, before she was able to get taken off title, she passed away. She didn't sign anything, she passed away. No one knew or followed up on this, and then here we are 30 years later looking at the history, explaining, I'm so sorry, sir, but you don't have the ability to sell this property on your own because your deceased ex-wife still holds an interest in the property, and we were then reaching out to their heirs to get them to also sign up. And if they wanted to make it messy, they could have made it real messy.
Easy, very
yeah,
easy.
they could have fought and say, hey, we think we're entitled to this, and made it real messy, but luckily they all agreed. They're like, that's fine. We still see you on the holidays sometimes. We're not going to make a fight over this. We're just going to sign the paperwork.
So, are you ready to take control of your family's future and legacy? Join us for Estate Planning 101. Protect your empire DMV. This event is more than just a seminar. It's an investment in peace of mind for you and your family. Saturday, February 24th, 2024. From 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Here's why you can't afford to miss this. Expert insights. You're going to be learning from top estate attorneys and financial experts who can break down some of this jargon and make it simple for you to understand. Discover custom strategies that cater to your unique situation, whether you're just starting out or you're updating an existing plan. Connect with like-minded individuals and professionals who are also on their journey to financial security. This event's ideal for everyone, whether you're a young professional, a parent, or nearing retirement. At Keller Williams Capital Properties, Bethesda, 4850 Rugby Avenue, Bethesda, Maryland. To register, either click on the link on our Instagram bio or click the link. I'll leave them down here in the show notes. Understanding estate planning is crucial for everyone. Take this step to protect your assets and ensure your wishes are honored. Now let's get back to the podcast.
So tenants in common is for someone like an investor. Like if Dan and I purchased a property together and it was $100,000 to buy it, and I put up, $50,000, and Dan. Well, if I put up $60,000, Dan put up $40,000.
Wow.
Because I'm more high rolling than him.
Wow.
Yeah.
He owns 40% of the property. I own 60% of the property. We can look at it like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to
I would
be.
probably draft it a 50-50 irrespective of the initial investment, but go ahead.
Well, for the example, we had to not make it a 50-50.
No, I'm just saying, like, for the future reference.
All right, if we go through that in the future, 50-50.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
But yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
So, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So,
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead.
okay.
No, you go ahead.
So, what are closing costs? Because that's everybody asks about closing costs. I'm like very choppy with this explanation about closing costs. So, can you break down what closing costs are?
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends. And it first is going to depend on, are we talking about sellers or are we talking about buyers?
Let's say buyer closing costs. Well, let's talk about both. I'm sorry,
We'll talk about both. So this is jurisdictional dependent for sellers, whether you're in really inside the Beltway or outside the Beltway. It's interesting. You could be in Maryland, but inside the Beltway is going to impact how things are paid depending on what contract you're using. There's something known as the G-Car contract. There's something also known as the MAR contract. Both are used in Maryland, and depending on which one you use will somewhat impact your title cost a little bit on the seller side. But for closing cost on sellers, that typically means you're going to be paying agent commissions. It means you're going to be paying taxes to the state of Maryland or DC, whichever jurisdiction you're in, kind of exit taxes in a way. And then there's going to be usually admin fees related to your agent, and that's not too bad. That's usually like anywhere from $300 to $700 Yeah, on the high end.
Wow.
Whereas certain commissions are typically going to range typically around 6% total, although there's some room there as well. And then taxes are very jurisdictional dependent. Montgomery County taxes are going to be more expensive than if you're in like Baltimore City or Howard County or PG or Charles or something like that. So it also is dependent on the county. And then you have your title fees. Inside the Beltway, typically your title fees you can expect, depending on if there's a lien on the property, to be anywhere from, I'd say, $400 to $1,000, really depends. But once you're outside the Beltway, you start using a different contract, the MAR contract. They put a lot of the onus on the buyer to pay the seller's title fees. So tip for agents who are working with sellers, there is room for negotiation and I think flexibility there if you don't make any adjustments to the default language in the contract.
Yeah.
So that's what you're looking at on the seller side. And then, of course, if you had any like staging done or something like that, those types of invoices would also be added onto your closing costs that you're looking at. On the buyer side, when we're looking at what are the closing costs, you're going to have your contract price as the starting point, but then you also have to pay, if you're working with a lender, you're going to have to pay the lender, you're going to have to pay their fees, you're going to have to pay taxes. There are certain ways to reduce taxes. If you're first-time home buyers, that's maybe a different topic. You have your title fees, which when you look at the title fees, you are paying for this legal history that's done on the property. That's known as the title abstract. You're also looking at lender's title insurance and buyer's title insurance. The buyer's title insurance is optional, and for like a
What's title insurance?
Yeah, so talking about title insurance, that protects your legal ownership in the home, and I can break that down just a little bit more once I wrap up on closing costs.
Mm-hmm.
That works.
Shut up, Dan.
No, I just like people in the cheat sheets, like we kind of like so anybody study Scientology? No.
No, I bought the book once on accident.
Bro, Dianetics?
Yeah, Dianetics.
You read
They're
the whole
"Here."
thing?
No, I didn't touch it. I read it. What is this? I've been
All
fooled.
right, well then I want reference page 873. But they do talk about when you're reading, if you come up, like say you're reading a book and then there's one word that you don't understand, they say if you continue to read that book and you read one word that you don't understand, you distort the entire meaning of the whole book. So they always say, look up that word, don't continue to go, because the entire meaning of the entire book has been distorted because you didn't understand that one.
Sure. Okay, that's a fair approach.
Extreme,
All right,
It's extreme, bro. Scientology is extreme,
It's
bro.
very extreme. It's for context clues, though. You know what I mean?
All right, well then, taking a page out of the Dianetics book, something I didn't think I'd ever say.
Yeah, you didn't think you were going to say that today, huh?
No, I did not. Title insurance, like I did briefly mention, it does protect your legal ownership in the home. It's optional. You don't have to buy title insurance, but I'll be honest, I have had scenarios where basically buyers opted out of title insurance. They go to sell the home 5-10 years later. We now have a title issue that would have easily been resolved with a title insurance policy, but because we don't have it, I've had it delay closing on a handful of occasions.
Yeah.
But it protects legal ownership, which means, for example, if the seller wasn't really the seller, it was someone pretending to be a seller, and like I mentioned, fraud is a problem right now in this industry.
Mhm.
Also, if the sellers had contracting work done, maybe they had someone come in, fix up the bathroom, and the sellers failed to pay that contractor could now could file a lien against the property to ensure payment. And if you're the buyers, you're probably going to use your title insurance policy to make sure those contractors get paid, or you are going to just file a title insurance claim to make sure it's taken care of. Ideally, you would go after the sellers, but if the sellers have gotten paid, left town, and you can't get in touch with them, you're now stuck handling this issue that the sellers created.
Yeah.
So it does protect you against problems created by other people, especially even now, building permits. Even if the seller failed or forgot to get a building permit taken care of, you bought the home, county comes knocking, hey, you forgot to get this permit for X. In certain circumstances, title insurance is going to cover those costs to repair the issue. Again, certain circumstances, not every time, but it can apply.
Dude, I'm surprised that title insurance is even optional.
Yeah, it feels like it should be mandatory, and even for the people that don't get it, it's a one-time cost, right? It's not too expensive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one, it is optional. I'd say last year, out of all of my transactions, I think maybe I had I don't know, over 1,000 transactions. I had 2 or 3 parties opt out. Those were investors who I think knew they weren't going to hold on to that for a long time.
Okay.
They're like, I'm getting in, I'm getting out, I'm going to save myself the usually anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. Again, depends on purchase price. But parties who were LLCs, investors, wanted to get in, get out, not have to worry about issues afterwards. Although technically, if they sold a home with a title issue, that buyer could come back and be like, hey, under the deed that you signed, you conveyed title that was clear and you did not do that. So you now need to help me resolve the issue. So it's a certain covenant that sellers are supposed to adhere to when they sell a property.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So, so then I guess one of the questions, so one of the issues I run into a lot with when it comes to title insurance, again, like say for example, Uncle Bob, passes away, they sell the property to a new buyer, right? But
Yeah.
it didn't really, maybe there's an aunt or a cousin somewhere who's like, oh, y'all sold that behind my back, da 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 da. Well, you as a buyer, you're just buying this house. You don't know anything about any of the people who you bought it from other than you bought this house. If somebody wants to come and file a claim against you and say you took this, you bought this house, it's really mine, you should have never had it in the first place, you have title insurance at that point that can say, look, y'all need to, handle this or resolve the claim if there's like a legit claim. They can't just kick you out of the house because the transaction wasn't legit, right?
Well, they might be able to,
Yeah.
but that is what title insurance is for and helps protect against. If you have what you're describing, which is a complete failure of title, meaning the sellers who sold the property did not have the full ability to sell the property, and you had this complete failure, title insurance will either cover your entire cost for the purchase and reimburse you, so you're not totally out of pocket all that money that you just spent to purchase the home. And a little bit more nuance on title insurance, there are 2 types. There's what's known as basic title insurance, which will cover you for the majority of title issues I see on a day-to-day basis. But then there's enhanced title insurance, which has some additional levels of protection. I think it runs from 30% more, and most people do opt into enhanced title insurance. And in fact, even the GCAR and MAR contract say, hey, title insurance policy is optional. It's going to be included as your default costs to let parties know, like, hey, it's going to be considered from the offset. But then enhanced title insurance policy goes up in value over time. So in your scenario that you're describing, Dan, if someone purchased a property for $500,000, they thought they purchased it from all the parties. 3 years later, you have a party coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, I had a legal interest in this home. It was not adequately sold to you, and the property is now worth $750,000. Well, the title insurance would not cover the $500,000. It would actually cover up to the $750,000, the increased value of the property. So when people ask me the difference between basic and enhanced, that's one of the things that I'm always mentioning as like, well, here's some of the differences.
Yeah, if you're a smart person, you're going to do the enhanced because your property should grow in value. We expect it to grow in value.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, when they do the math, they look at it, they're like, well, it's a one-time fee. It's good not just while I own the home, but forever.
Yeah.
In case I sell the home and someone comes back and says, hey, you gave me a home, there was a title issue, and you know nothing about, you'd still be covered for it under an enhanced policy as long as it's not a title issue that you yourself created when you sold the property.
Yeah. What's the process of someone putting a lien on? So I hear about mechanic liens all the time, but I've never dealt with a situation, I think, where a seller had a lien on the property, or at least a lien like that. So how does someone excuse me, how does someone put a lien? Someone comes in, does work, I don't pay them, they want to put a lien on the house. What's the process of that, and then how do you guys clear that up?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways that can appear in the title work, but it does happen, and I've seen it. I actually had one last year where we did the title search. We didn't see any mechanics lien. Title looked good. The day before closing, we run our last search to see if there's anything else that comes up, and there was a mechanics lien that was not originally there when we first ran the title search 3 weeks ago. So we call the seller, hey, seller, like, do you recall this lien, something about non-payment? It's shown up on the land records. Seller's like, oh, I forgot about it. I had no idea. What do we need to get this resolved? And basically, when you're looking at the land record, you see a statement that's filed by a contractor that says, hey, I provided these services. It was worth X amount. I'm placing it on the property until I get paid. And so to proceed to closing, we actually had to pay off this contractor who did not get paid. But the process really is there's usually a standard form depending on the jurisdiction we're working on, where you can like Google it if you wanted to, where you're claiming that, hey, I did these services, did not get paid, and you're filing it in the land records against the property. They're only good for a limited amount of time. So once you file that on the property, you then have to follow up with a lawsuit. And after a certain amount of time, that is, I think it's like 6 months, that lien against the property expires if you have not acted or done anything on the property.
So me and Nick was having this argument of many debates that we have about the future of real estate.
Yeah.
And I tend to think that all of this is going to be gone at a certain point. I'm hedging my bets on push button real estate. Everything's done for you. So what are your thoughts on blockchain technology, smart contracts? Do you think that type of stuff can completely wipe out the title industry, or do you think there's still going to be a need for like boots on the ground?
I think, well, I'm biased, clearly. I'd like to keep a job and not consider myself obsolete in the future. But I do think you will always have a need for some boots on the ground. AI is good. It's really good. So is some of the automated technologies out there, but they are created by humans and mistakes do happen. And that's kind of where title insurance does come into play in certain points, is to make sure we catch mistakes, or if mistakes aren't caught, like you are covered and protected for them. What happens? And the law is complicated. The law is complex and it is changing. Like the law could change how good a statute of limitations for a lien is for a certain amount of time. And if the AI hasn't caught up to the change in the law right away, that might change what is or is not legally valid still against the property. And people move fast. But it is interesting you mentioned that, because in the software that we use on our end to process real estate transactions, there is a new option for AI to open the contract for us. I swear, just last week this came up. I haven't had a chance to play around with it.
So it begins.
And so it begins. Exactly. I'm like, oh God, is my job going to become irrelevant opening contracts now?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, this idea that, like, the real estate industry become push button is very unrealistic to me, right? Like, this is not how industries change, right? Like, the only industry, well, not the only industry, but if you take an industry, something that wasn't an industry is no longer industry anymore, is like when people were rolling around on horse and buggy, right?
Yeah.
And now we transform the cars. That industry is completely gone, right?
Yeah.
But even if you take the grocery store, right, where we could say, like, okay, well, you can self-checkout, that's AI, right? But you're not self-checkouting when you're doing a full grocery, right? When you have, 50 items, nobody checks those out. And you still have to have people monitoring the computers because it messes up, right? So there's still going to be, jobs and things for people to do. We can't, totally rely on technology to do everything.
Yeah, I think things will change. I think you're right. Things are going to change, and we have to be open and ready to adapt to those changes that are coming. But I think because real estate is so local, right? How every county has their own set of rules. They have their own set of contracts that they use. I think it will be tough and difficult for AI to adapt to that every time immediately. And I think that's why there needs to be that room for oversight and review. One of my roommates I used to live with back in the day, he was a Georgetown debate coach, actually. And one of the topics one year was AI and legal AI. And if you have AI writing briefs and lawsuits and they make a mistake, who do you now sue for legal malpractice? Exactly. So maybe the attorneys will find a way to make that not happen. But it will be an interesting change in the next 2, 3, 5 years.
I don't think everything is going to be. I mean, so there's an interesting book by Andrew Yang.
Yang, I like Yang. Yeah.
Yang.
You read his book? Yeah, Yang.
I didn't read his book. Yeah.
His book. It's about UBI. It's about Universal Basic Income. Which I'm not a fan of, obviously. But I think the book was interesting because I like reading different perspectives. And one of his main motivations, what he considers one of the main drivers behind justifying a universal basic income, is the rise of automation. And like, that's basically the whole book, where he basically points out every single industry in our countries for the past 100 years that has been either revolutionized or completely ephemeralized or completely obsolete at this point because of automation, right? Like haberdasheries,
Sure.
Nobody goes to haberdasher, right? Blacksmiths. Nobody goes to blacksmiths.
Yeah.
You're not gonna walk around looking for somebody to put horseshoes on your horse because nobody has a horse, right? Unless you're like wealthy, right? So those jobs haven't been eliminated, but they've been extremely ephemeralized.
Yeah.
Travel agents, milkman, right? The milkman got put out of business by one process, pasteurization. Once we learn how to preserve milk, there's no need for milkmen. So those people, what do they do? Like, there are no milkmen.
They become mailmen.
Yeah.
Right? And so, even back in the 80s, I remember when, I won't go that far, but I'll say mailmen's getting automated, right? A lot of this stuff, you can see a lot of the automation coming with automatic driving cars, even though they're trying to squelch a lot of that stuff. So yeah, I don't think it's getting eliminated, but I do think that a lot of this stuff is going to be severely reduced. We're going to be talking a lot more about title. We're going to be doing a lot of probate, talking about probate and how to buy family properties and estate properties at our event tomorrow, because we're 1 week in advance.
Yeah.
So people can check you out there. But one last question for you, Joe, and it kind of piggybacks off of what we were just talking about. But where do you see real estate and the role of real estate agents and title companies 20 years from today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation that's happening right now. And where do we see it in 2 to 3 to 4 years out? I believe you recently had a pod related to those string of lawsuits that had come out. Is that right? Yeah. And where do I see the role? I think for real estate agents, which is going to be separate and distinct from settlement agents, for real estate agents, I think those who can continue to provide service to their clients and do it a high level are going to continue to thrive and do well. Agents like yourselves, right? You can provide value. You're not just phoning it in, but actually working with your clients and helping them through a transaction, because we could all probably YouTube a video to do some menial task, but I'm not going to YouTube how to do plumbing or something like that. I'm going to go to someone who does it every single day. So I think that barrier to entry is going to get higher to succeed and thrive. From a settlement agent perspective, I'm not sure where it's going to go. I think that we will always need someone to handle the process of transferring title from seller to buyers and make sure title is clear. If not, just for the simple thing of liability and what happens if something goes wrong, someone you can either support you in the form of title insurance to make a claim on, or someone to say, hey, this did not go the way it was supposed to. Otherwise, perhaps we're seeing a lot more litigation in the market. I don't know. I guess we'll have to see what happens. But I know for us, it's a conversation we have every single day at Universal Title. How do we continue to help buyers and sellers through the process? How do we continue to give them a great experience? And one of the things we've looked at, other than for sellers, which convenience is important, they want to sign documents online, that's typically okay. You can do that with the notary. But for those who are still coming into the office, how do we make this a nice experience, a luxury experience, something that makes everyone feel comfortable and more of a celebration? So champagne toasts have been a thing that's been going around a long time at the settlement table. But what more? What's that extra oomph we can give clients so they still feel like when real estate is local, right? It is local. There's a local touch in real estate that I don't think you find in a lot of other markets or jurisdictions. So having a local touch, having people come in, that human to human interaction, I think in customer service really is going to be a huge thing and will continue to play a part. We can all pick up the phone and call a company and try and get in touch, but we hate dealing with the automated systems.
Yeah.
I want to talk to someone. Just talk to me.
Right. Zero.
Exactly. Zero. So
Operator.
as we get, I think in real estate, it is complex, and you are going to still want to talk to someone rather than trying to have it automated or go through the process or try and Google it. You want to talk to someone who knows what they're doing, how to handle their real estate transactions, and who can answer questions pretty easily. And that's something definitely we pride ourselves on at Universal Title. My clients, my agents, they know they can call me, they can text me. I'm going to pick up the phone. We're going to figure out what we need to do to get things done for our clients.
Yeah, solid, bro. Appreciate you for jumping on the pod, man. Where can everybody find you at?
Yeah, so I think for me, where you can find me, we're starting to work on this. This may be day one of becoming a title producer, influencer. We'll see.
This is day one.
It is day one. There we go. Universal Title. If you go to Our People, I'm there. I'm on the website. Like I said, I do manage our Universal Title Bethesda as well as Rockville offices. If someone had a question, you can call me. Like I said, my phone number is on the website, or you can always send me an email, jbruno@universaltitle.com, or reach out to Dan. Dan knows how to get in touch with me. He'll definitely forward it along.
Where can they find you at, Nick Bush?
You can find me on Instagram at Nick Bush the Realtor, and everywhere else at Nick Bush the Realtor. And then I have a podcast too you can subscribe to. It's called Real Estate Explained. We drop episodes every Friday.
Yes, sir. And my name is Dan Wheeler. DanWheelerSellsHomes.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this content with anybody that you think might think it's dope. For all of us here at the Real Estate Wire Podcast, we are out.
Solid.
Thanks, guys. That was fun. Yeah.
Titles like hard to talk about. Like,
Thanks, bro. Yeah, man. It's kind of like,
It wasn't too dull. It can't be dull. It really can't.